Joshua. We've been studying with Joshua. We have been studying about Joshua since January, and some of you are probably ready to get past Joshua. We will. Eventually we will. It won't be today, though, but maybe in a couple of weeks, maybe by the end of the month or the first of next month, we'll move on into something else. After Easter, I'm sure we'll transition ourselves into another book of the Bible. But we're going through a little bit verse by verse at time, chapter by chapter, and today we find ourselves in Joshua 24. The book of Joshua begins with a funeral. In verse 1, Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, and we've discussed this, but Joshua chapter 1, verse 1 says, "Now it came about after the death of Moses." So we have the funeral of Moses right here, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise across this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the sons of Israel." So Moses has passed away here. Joshua is taking Moses' place, and we've discussed this. So there's a transition. These words are to Joshua. The transition is from Moses to Joshua. God is telling him, "Moses, my servant, is dead. You are my servant now. I want you to arise. I want you to cross the Jordan. I've got this plan. This is the vision. This is what you are to do." So just to recap a little bit about everything that's gone on. So they move across the Jordan, and what do they have? They have this victory. They have this surprising defeat of Jericho. And we showed pictures of what Jericho looked like, about the walls they had, the double walls, how they were stacked, how it was a fortified city, how the gates were closed, how you really just couldn't breach into this city. But yet God provided. What they do, they walked around the walls 13 times, and we discussed how the walls fell outwardly. And that's not the way it should have happened, but yet we could see God's hand in the whole matter. So God delivers Jericho to them. Then they have this one huge defeat. They move from Jericho, from Jericho to Gilgal, and Gilgal was their home base. Gilgal was the home base, was their church where you're to come back, to gather, to strengthen, to encourage. They set up monuments, markers at Gilgal as they entered, so they could remember, this is what the Lord has done for us. He's brought us safe thus far. And then they have that one defeat at Ai, where Achan, what does he do? God says, "I want you to set apart the first fruit of your labor. I want you to give an offering to me, that this first city is to be mine. I'm going to give you the rest." But Achan looks at the treasures of Ai and says, "No, I cannot give God his glory here. I must take some of this for myself." He saw the bling, he saw the razzle-dazzle, he saw the valuables in Ai, and he thought, "I have to have this. This needs to be in my treasure box. This needs to be in my wallet. I need to take control of this because I can use it better than God has." God says, "I've got so much more for you if you will just trust me in this matter." So we know that they were defeated there the first time around at Ai, and we know the story of Achan. We've been through that. So Achan wanted to control a portion that God had said was to be his. So we learn, if we want to have continual victory in our life, then we need to let God be Lord of our life in all things. Then what else? We read that we need to stay close to God. Stay close to God, and when we're close to God, He brings encouragement to us. We need to be obedient to Him in all areas of our life. And then we moved into the cities of refuge, which I really enjoyed the study about the cities of refuge, about how they were set up around the nation, 3 on one side of the Jordan, 3 on the other side of the Jordan, so that no matter where you were close. There was a place that you could run to if you needed this kind of refuge. If you had accidentally killed somebody, if there was something you had done and you needed a place of refuge, that you were free to run to this city. And if you could make it there, if you could explain to the to the guard, the governor, the mayor at the door there, at the gate, then you could come in. And then there was to be a trial by your peers. And if they found you to be innocent of this accident, and then you could stay there till who died? Till the high priest died. And this was a great picture of how Christ is our high priest, how he came here, how he gave his life for us. When their high priest died at the cities of refuge, what did they do? They were allowed to go back home, to live in freedom. Our high priest has come for us. He's died. He's given his life. We are allowed to live in freedom now. So we moved past the cities of refuge, and it wasn't just for the native person. What did we say? It was for the stranger alike. It was for all. It was for whosoever will can come to a place of refuge. And then last week, who did we talk about? We talked about Caleb. And yes, did you see in your bulletin? Somebody was paying attention. There was a little tagline in your bulletin about last week's message. Yeah, we even had a Caleb with us last week. I see I ran him off, though. What did Caleb's name mean? Dog. Exactly. I offended him so much, he didn't come back. But anyway, Caleb's name meant dog. So at least one person was listening. So we talked about Caleb, and how old was Caleb? Caleb was the oldest man in the country, 85. Caleb's, well, Joshua, we find out Joshua was 110 today, so Caleb's 85. The second oldest man, he's 85, and what does he do? He starts out on a new ministry that God has called him to. He didn't say, I've retired, I've picked out my cemetery plot, I've picked out my casket, I've paid up my fees, I'm ready to go, the family won't have to worry about anything, it's all taken care of. I've picked out my suit to wear. Caleb says, no, at 85, I'm going to do what God called me to do 40 plus years ago. So that's where Caleb was. We find Caleb still serving. Now in Joshua 24, verse 29, we come to yet another funeral. This will be Joshua's funeral. Verse 29 in chapter 24, it came about after these things that Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. So Joshua begins with a funeral in the opening verse of the book, and then it ends with a funeral, and actually it ends with three funerals. Now, if we notice in 24 verse 1 that this is taking place in a place called Shechem. This is Joshua's, and Shechem will be important to us at the end of our message, but Joshua is delivering this last message, this last sermon to the people. And he has a word to say to, and he knows that this is going to be his last message. Look at verse 14 here in chapter 23. Joshua says, now behold today. He says, I'm going away of all the earth. He says, I know that I'm about to die. And you know in all your hearts and in all your souls that not one word of all the good words which the Lord your God spoke concerning you has failed. So Joshua is saying, look, you've heard God speak. He's brought the word to you, and you know in your heart that not a single dot of that has failed. Everything he's spoken to you has come to pass. He says, all have been fulfilled for you, not one of them has failed. So he wants to talk. Joshua wants to talk to the people. He wants to address them. He wants to bring their mind back to what God has done for them. Now let me ask you, if you knew today was your last day, if you knew that you would not wake up tomorrow, that you would not see the sun rise tomorrow, is there something that you would want to say? That's where Joshua is. He has this word he wants to share, he wants to say. What if you knew you weren't going to wake up tomorrow? Would you want to say something to your kids? Is there a word you would want to say to your grandkids? Maybe your parents. You have a word to say to your parents. Maybe you have a word you would like to say to the church. So that's what Joshua is doing. Joshua is speaking this word to all these people. Here he is. He's 110 years old, and he has one last thing to say. He has one more direction to give them, and it revolves around one word, and we find the one word, the one thought in verse 15. And in this verse, we're very familiar with this verse of Joshua 24, verse 15, but the word is choice. A matter of fact, he uses you choose. Joshua is saying, you choose who will be your Lord. You get to choose who will be your God. Will it be the one true God, or is it going to be some of these little g gods of your forefathers? Is it going to be your possessions? Is it going to be the wealth that you think you did with your own hands? Is it going to be your checking account, your retirement, your job? Is it going to be your house? Is it going to be your hobbies? Is it going to be whatever it is that might come before the one true God? So Joshua is telling them, he says, you get to choose there in verse 15. Now what book, if you flip over one page, what book comes after Joshua? Judges. Judges comes after Joshua. In Joshua, we just discussed, they had, and we've talked about this, for 7 years after taking the land, all except for the battle at Ai, for 7 years they had 31 victories. 31 battles in 7 years. They were victorious in every one of them. Why? Because they were following God. Because God was center in their life. They were following His directive, His command, His will. So they were victorious in all that they did. The one time they got out of His will, they were met with a great defeat. So for 7 years, 31 battles, they have success after success after success. But in Judges, what happens in Judges? They are met with failure after failure after failure after failure. And it's a powerful lesson that we can apply to our life as well. Just as they were met with failure after failure. And there's a reason. And we'll see how come they were met with failure. It is our choice. Who are we going to follow? Are we looking for spiritual victory in our life? Or are we going to follow something else and be met with failure in our life? It is your choice. What are you going to rely on? Here's the first thing. The first thing is, in transition, you choose the life you will live. You have a choice in the midst of transition what you're going to do. You have a choice every day of your life to make. Who will I follow? What will I follow? What will be Lord of my life? What am I going to choose? So, what kind of life are you choosing right now? Chapter 24, verse 3. Joshua is speaking here. He says, Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river and led him through all the land of Canaan and multiplied his descendants and gave him Isaac. Joshua is speaking here. I guess it would be considered third person maybe, but he's speaking as if he's God. So he is talking like he is God. These words are coming from God right here. Just key in on what he says here. See if you see something, a word that shows itself more than any other word. We're going to read through verse 13. So he starts out in verse 3, he says, Then I took your father Abraham. Verse 4, To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau, and to Esau I gave Mount Seir to possess it. Verse 5, Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt by what I did in the midst, and afterward I brought you out.
I brought your fathers out of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and Egypt pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. But when they cried out, I did this for you. I saw what I did in Egypt, and your own eyes saw what I did in Egypt. Verse 8, then I brought you into the land of the Amorites, who live beyond the Jordan, and I gave them into your hand. Verse 9, then Balak, you're familiar with Balak, then Balak, the son of Zippor, the king of Moab, arose and fought against Israel, and he calls who? Balak calls Balaam. But, verse 10, but I was not willing to listen to Balaam. So he had to bless you, and I delivered you from his hand. You crossed the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the citizens of Jericho fought against you. So I delivered all these people, thus I gave them into your hand. Verse 12, then I sent the hornet before you, and it drove out the two kings of the Amorites. Verse 13, I gave you a land on which you had not labored, and the cities on which you had not built, and you have lived in them. You are eating of vineyards and olive groves of which you did not plant. Joshua is speaking as if he's God, but verse 3 through 13 here, what word was used more than any other? I. 17 times the word I is used. It's as if God is saying, I did it. Don't you dare think that you did this on your own. You had nothing to do with it. You were obedient to me, yes, but I delivered you through all of it. Now, I just love verse 13. I'll read it to you again. It says, I gave you a land on which you did not labor. He says, and then I gave you a city. I gave you houses. I gave you vineyards. I gave you olive groves. So what was that going to be like? Have any of you ever built a house before? Have you? Did you enjoy it? Paula did. Paula's about the only person. Most of you are borderline getting a divorce by the time you finish up building a house. I see some heads shaking there. Yeah. Hey, whoa. Preach it, brother, he says. But anyway, you go to buy a house, you did the legwork of, you went to look at houses, you went to visit houses, you had realtors come and show you, you looked through the papers, the internet, whatever, to find a house to either buy or plans to build, and then you picked out all the faucets and the fixtures and the flooring and the lighting and everything like that, the carpet, hardwood, whatever it is that you put down. God says you didn't have to do any of that. You didn't have to build a mall. You didn't have to build a grocery store. He says, I already did that for you. Do you see what these people walked into? Their whole economy was already set. God says, I've given you these cities. You didn't have to build a house. How many of you plant gardens? A lot of you in this area plant gardens. How many of you weed that garden? Not near as many of you that plant the gardens. But there's work to do with it. I like to grow blackberries. I try. I don't even know if there's a word to describe what I do with blackberries. Grow is not the word to use, but I have some blackberry bushes. We have a professional blackberry grower back there. She needs to write me how to do this, but I don't know if maybe the deer beat me to it. I guess the deer and the birds get to it before I do, but I can't grow those things. And when they do grow with fruit on them, they're bitter and they're not juicy and they're not sweet and everything. But I got some strawberries out there. The strawberries do good. I have to protect them from the birds. But God says, look, Todd, if I'd have been there, he'd said, look, I've already got a house with blackberries growing. I've already got a vineyard for you. I've already got an olive grove for you. I've already got your garden set up for you. I've already got the tomatoes planted. I've already got the okra, the cucumbers, the squash, the corn. He says, I've already got that planted for you. You guys didn't come in here and do a thing. I love verse 13 right there. All of this is done for you, and you're reaping the harvest of what God did for you. So Joshua is saying, look, you didn't do any of this. Don't you forget that God gave you this. God guarded you. He protected and He provided for you. He did it for you. Now, if you remember back Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 8, Moses gives his final sermon as well. Moses basically had to start a new nation with who? With freshmen in college, young kids, young adults. He starts a new nation. The others had to die out. If you look back, keep your finger right there in Joshua, but turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. Moses wants them to remember something. Here in verse 2, he says, "You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not." So he wants them to remember something. Remember what? We're going to find that in verse 17 through 20. He says you need to remember God, that you need to keep his commandments in your heart. Otherwise, you may say in your heart, if God isn't the God of your heart, you may say this: "My power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth." But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. It shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you today that you will surely perish. Like the nations of the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God. So what is Moses saying here? Moses is saying, look, he said, if you don't remember God as the Lord of your life, you may in your own mind, in your own heart, think, I did this. I planted these blackberries. I planted these strawberries. And look, my intelligence, my fertilizing, my trimming, my pruning, look what I have done for myself. Not only that, but I have picked these berries, I've packaged them, I've sent them off to market, and I have made money off of my vineyards. Look what I have to show for myself. God says you better not think that way, because when you begin to think, when the central focus of your thought process is you will surely fail and you will perish. Sounds a lot like our lives today, doesn't it? Sounds a lot like our country today. Look at what I have done, not where God has brought me. So Joshua points out, Joshua says it's I. Moses says it's he. So they're saying it's God. Don't you lose focus that God needs to be the central person in your life, the central figure in your life. But we've lost in our world today, in our mind today, we have lost the thankfulness that we should give to God. We don't have a thankful heart for the most part anymore. We look, what's going to happen for me next? What's good coming up for me next? I got this one thing. I made it up this ladder. I've made it to this position in my job. What's next for me? And we do not look back with this thankfulness. So Joshua is saying, you should choose to live a life of thankfulness to God. But we think in this country, and we need to know that we are blessed. We're extremely blessed in this country. We're blessed so much that we don't even think about it anymore. And it really doesn't matter which side of the economic scale you fall on, whether you're extremely wealthy and you're a millionaire or billionaire, or if you live on some government help. You know, it doesn't matter if you have a smartphone, or as Jimmy calls it, a dumb phone. You know? It doesn't matter in this country, because we are blessed. Like I said, it doesn't matter what side of the economic scale you fall on, whether you have a 42-inch flat screen TV or if you have a 56-inch or 65-inch flat screen TV. Everybody's got them now. What I'm saying is we are blessed with all kinds of things in this country, yet we are not that thankful. Do you know that 1 billion people in the world live on less than $1.25 a day? 1 billion. Do you know that another 2 billion people in this world live on less than $2.50 a day? That's 3 billion people out of 7 billion people in the world that live on less than $2.50 a day. You know, and we read about it every day in the news, people are dying to get into this country, legally or illegally. They're dying to get in this country because they know if they were to live in poverty in this country, they would be richer than the majority of the people in the rest of this world. So we're blessed. We are blessed. We're so blessed that we don't even know it. None of us have missed a meal in our life. And if we have, it hasn't hurt us. We are not trying to live on $1.25 a day, but the truth is we live in a place and time now that we no longer appreciate what we have. We live in a place and time now that we're always thinking about what is next for me, what is coming for me, what more, that I deserve this. And I'm included in that. I think like that myself at times. I forget to be thankful for what has happened in the past, and I'm always looking forward to what is next for me. So Joshua says, you need to choose a life of thankfulness. And I think we all need to focus on that more in our life. We need to be a lot more thankful for what God has done for us and what He's brought us from, what He has saved us from. Because when you get right down to it, we were all headed to a devil's hell, but yet He sent His Son to crucify Him, to leave Him here, to bring Him here, to leave His glory in heaven so that He can deliver us from hell. That's where we were all headed. But yet we have lost that thankfulness in our life. When we begin to be thankful for what God has done for us, we find a new joy in our life. And a lot of us need that joy in our life. A lot of us in the world today are depressed because of the stress of the world, the anxiety of the world, the pressure of the world, and we've lost that joy. But when you look back in thankfulness for what God has done for you, you will begin to find some of that joy that you need in your life. Chapter 24, verse 31 here in Joshua. Joshua is going to bring them this message. And notice how the people respond here. This is their response. Israel served the Lord. Joshua has brought them this message. Choose you this day who you're going to serve. He says you're going to serve the little gods of your family on the other side of the river over there in Egypt. Are you going to serve those little gods, or who are you going to serve? But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. So Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua. So as long as Joshua was alive, they served the Lord. As long as the elders that were serving with Joshua were alive, who did they serve? They served the Lord and had known all the deeds of the Lord which He had done for Israel. Now, Judges chapter 2, verse 6 through 10. This continues on. The same dialogue just continues right here. When Joshua had dismissed the people, the sons of Israel went each to his inheritance to possess the land. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders. That's right where we were, who survived Joshua, and who had seen all the great work of the Lord, which He had done for Israel. Now that's us right there. We have seen the work of the Lord. If you haven't seen His work in your life, then you haven't trusted Him completely with everything in your life. Verse 8, then Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance at Timnath-Heres in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. All that generation also were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them, who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done in Israel. So what happened to the next generation? As long as Joshua was alive, they served the Lord. As long as the elders who survived Joshua were alive, who did they serve? They served the Lord. But yet, what happens? One generation comes and they didn't lead the next group in the things of the Lord. They didn't pass down something. Is it important to pass the word down to another generation? Yes. I believe we would all say yes. Is it important to disciple other people? Yes. We should all agree with that. Is it important to be in church? Yes. Is it important to have a daily prayer life? Yes. Is it important to have a daily devotion? Yes. Is it important to be in fellowship daily with God, to read the Word at home? Is it important to share God with your children and the next generation that comes behind you? Yes, it is. But there arose a generation who did not share the things of God. Where are you in that? Have you shared the things of God? Are you in the generation now that has not shared? Are you in the generation now that is not regular in church? Are you in the generation now that apart after church that you are completely on your own the other six days and 23 hours of the week? Are you in that part that does not read the Word at home, read it to your children, teaching them and training them, training the next generation? If we don't fill the next generation, if we don't fill our grandchildren, our children with the Word of God, Hollywood will fill them with something else. You get to choose. Who do you choose this day? So at some point, the previous generation stopped being thankful. Here's the second thing. You choose the Lord you will worship. Joshua 24, verse 14. Now therefore, fear the Lord. Now that fear means worship God, praise, respect. Now therefore, worship Him, praise Him, respect the Lord, and serve Him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your father served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If there is not worship of the Lord, if there is not service of the Lord in times of transition, you will experience failure. It'll be difficult to make it through. So in this verse, when there is fear for the Lord, when there's respect, when there's worship for Him, you need to serve Him. Put away the things of the youth. Put away the little g gods and serve the one true God. But what happens in times of discouragement in our life? What happens in times of struggle in our life? We drop out. I'm discouraged. I'm anxious. There's trouble in my life. Well, the first thing I need to do, I just need to drop out of church. That's the problem of my life. Worship is critical to transition in our life. To drop out of church is a trick from Satan. That's a ploy he uses. He thinks if he can convince you that in the midst of your trouble, your transition, your pain, your anguish, your hurt, your disenchantment, if you will just drop out of church, then that will be the solution for your problems. I better just stay home because I'm discouraged. I'm hurt, so I'll just stay home. Verse 15. So if it's disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, Choose for yourselves today whom you will serve, whether the gods which your father served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Joshua says, you can worship. You can choose to worship the little g gods, but as for me, I'm serving the one true God. It is your choice. You have a free will. Who are you going to worship? You're going to worship an idol? You're going to worship a magazine? You're going to worship an actress, an actor, a star, a musician? You're going to worship a model, a sports person? You're going to try to dress like them, emulate them, act like them? What is your idol? Joshua says, I serve the Lord. And here's the last thing. You choose to witness. Joshua 24, verse 23 through 26. Now therefore, put away the foreign gods which are in your midst, and incline your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. The people said to Joshua, we will serve the Lord our God, and we will obey his voice. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day, and made for them a statute and an ordinance in Shechem. There's that word, Shechem. We're coming back to it. Verse 26. And Joshua wrote these words in the book of the law of God, and he took a large stone and set it up there under the oak that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. Now that choose, Joshua says, you choose this day. He says, you've got some little g gods in your house, and you need to put them away. And that choose, in the original Hebrew, is you actively have to continue to do it. It's a daily choice. Sometimes every minute, every hour. It's an active choice that we have to consistently, constantly choose to serve God, to worship him, to live after him. So Joshua says, you need to put away these little g gods. And what do they say? They say, yes, we want to do that. We will serve the Lord our God. So he says, well, what are we going to do? We're going to set up a stone. We're going to set up, I'm going to write this down in the book. I'm going to take a large stone and set it up under what? An oak tree in Shechem. And look at Genesis. Genesis chapter 35, verse 2 through 4. Well, this is good. This is our last verse, and we're done. I know you disciple now, kids, you're already asleep, but that's okay. Y'all had nap time at Sunday school. Josh showed me the pictures. But here we are, Genesis 35, verses 2 through 4. Don't forget the rock. Don't forget the rock in the oak tree. 2 through 4. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves and change your garments. He says, repent, wash yourself up, get clean. Put this stuff away, and let us arise and go to Bethel, and I will make an altar there for God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone. So Jacob he's been fleeing. He's met Esau. He fled from Esau. He met Esau. He fled from Laban. Rachel had stolen. You remember, Rachel had stolen that little idol, that little household idol. And what did Laban do? Laban came after them. And what was she doing? She was sitting on a little trunk or something, a little chest, and she wouldn't get up. It was in a sack or something. She says, I'm not getting up. I can't move right now. So Laban wanted that little idol. So Jacob comes and he says, let us go to Bethel and make an altar there, and we're going to get rid of these little g gods that you people have brought from your home with you. Verse 4. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, and the rings which were in their ears, not your earrings, ladies, but they had good luck charms in their ear. And Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem. Boy, is that the same oak? Now, it's going to be I don't know how long oak trees live. But if that is the same oak, I believe that the symbolism is the same. That these people in Joshua's time would have remembered what Jacob did, that Jacob gathered the little idols from the houses, dug a place for them, stuck them in the ground, buried them near the oak at Shechem, and Joshua comes and says, you remember what Jacob did, your forefather Jacob? You're back here in this area. We are setting up a monument, a large rock, and this rock will bear witness to the fact that you saying that we will serve the Lord, that we are going to trust in the one true God. You need to get rid of what you think your hope is in, what you think your power is in, what you think your wealth is in, and serve the one true God. At a point in your life, you made a decision to follow God. Now do it. It's just what Joshua said. You have made a decision to follow God. Now, in all areas of your life, do it. That's the word for us today. Let's pray. Maybe you haven't made that decision in your life. Maybe you don't have that moral compass, that moral direction, the guidance that you need to point you in that way. Maybe that's what you're seeking today. Maybe you feel this hopelessness in your life, this lostness, that you're just bouncing around in an ocean, that you don't know which way to go, that you still have all these little G's in your life, and that you need to follow Him completely, that you need to surrender your life to Him, that you need that Savior to rescue you, that you need to run to that city of refuge, and that place of refuge is Jesus Christ for us, who is there to forgive you of your sin. Maybe that's the decision that you need to make today. There is an eternity that waits every one of us. You get to choose where you will spend it. Maybe in your life you've been serving the little G too long, and you want to transition to give your full life to God. As always, the invitation stands, the altar is open. Love to pray with you if you have a concern. Pray by yourself, bring your friend, bring the one sitting next to you as we sing this last song. Amen.